From a leadership perspective, it's really important that expectations are set. And this primarily means what's the policy? What is the policy of the organization? What is acceptable? What is not acceptable? Or you can dive in and say, this is not acceptable. Bam, 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 bam. And also lay out the consequences. If you do this, if you violate this policy, and a number of companies have that, like with social media, if you violate, this policy, you bring this ill repute upon the organization, violation of a morality clause, something like that, that can lead to termination. And when you have that expectation set as far as this is what is acceptable, this is what's not acceptable, and this is what the consequences would be, you're setting up the understanding, you're setting up the playing field of what can and can't be done. Now, the second part of that is once you have that done is the enforcement, is the execution. It should be timely, it has to be fair, and it has to be consistent. If you let stuff go and then enforce it on certain people, that's going to be unfair and uneven application of policy, which can create their own separate issues. So it's important that it's someone that's in a leadership role, someone that's in an ownership role, that ideally you have these guardrails in place. So when something does happen like this, you can be like, whoa, this is what we do. This is our rules. Keep them in mind. And then if you don't do it, these could be the consequences. Now, as an individual, what's your role? What's the expectation? As an individual and an organization, you need to know your policy. But for where you work, have an understanding of what those expectations are, what that policy is, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. So as far as for people who are individual employees, and you find yourself in those positions, it's really important to understand what the policy is. And you really have one or two choices at that point. You can either accept it and you can embrace it. Don't necessarily have to agree with it, but you accept it and embrace it. You agree to abide by it, or you exit. Because if you don't agree with it, if you don't accept it, if you don't agree to abide by it, it could then come down to a question of, do you get terminated or exited in some other fashion, or do you make the decision to exit? So it's something to keep in mind, whether you're on the leadership end of the spectrum or the employee end of the spectrum, as far as what the expectations are and what your options are as far as operating in the workspace.